What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Friends of mine that I know through gay shame and queers undermining Israeli terrorism have been doing movement work with the group LAGAI since the 1980s. Queer activism that doesn't sell people out or leave people out unless they're cops, as well as some other deeper level shit that I think has helped a lot of people around LAGAI avoid crashing and burning out, and I think is useful to learn from if you're planning on doing movement work long term without flaming out. This interview with Deeg from LAGAI, who's been on the podcast before, is an attempt to capture some of these things, but is obviously only one perspective from a group that started in the 1970s as Lesbians and Gays Against Intervention, opposed to the U.S. war machine doing things that the U.S. war machine does, meddling in other places around the world like Nicaragua, Vietnam, Guatemala, Honduras, Palestine, and so on. They've been talking about how all oppressions are connected for a long ass time, talking about how when you isolate an issue like gay or trans rights from other liberation struggles, it's easy to fall into the trap of selling out other groups of oppressed people or even selling out people from your own group. And from the beginning, they opposed the co-optation of pride by corporations and cops. They opposed gays giving a fuck about being in the military or the lionization of right-wing gay politicians who we are expected to support just because of who they fuck. And they also put out UltraViolet, a zine that is the longest running, largest circulation zine that goes inside to people in prison for free. And they're there for each other in a way that I aspire for all of my relationships to be. I could say a lot more, but I'm just going to get into the conversation, which ended up being a two-parter, and let DJ explain more about LAGAI, this group that has always done things on consensus, that has never fallen into the 501c3 trap, the trap of the movement work becoming about money or tying everything to specific personalities. And they continue to do it today. If you find this podcast helpful, please go to patreon.com/San Francisco. Help us out. You can also find all of the past episodes there. Here is Deej. So how did you become radicalized?
I became radicalized when I was growing up in the late 50s. I was born in 51. So around when I was 10, there started to be a lot of news up north about the civil rights movement, which had started in the South. And so I became aware of that. I became aware of that by kids who were sent on speaking tours. You know, like in 63, kids were sent on speaking tours who had been fire hosed in Alabama and all that stuff. And so by 1963, we were doing support stuff up here for Mississippi Summer. Like my friends from junior high school, we collected stuff to send down, clothes from this co-op that had a bunch of old unionists and Jews and stuff living in it who were taking the clothes off their beds and everything to send down south. And I was living in New York, so there was a lot of support going on around that. There was also a school boycott over the de facto segregation in New York City schools. So all of that stuff was kind of in the works in the early 60s as I was becoming an adolescent person. And that's the milieu in which I grew up. You know, and then eventually the Vietnam War. I went to a demonstration against the Vietnam War in 1963 just because I was hanging out in Union Square, maybe the first demonstration against the war. And, you know, so the Vietnam War became obviously a big issue by 1965 when there, you know, was a demonstration of 500,000 people in New York City. So throughout my high school years, we were doing a combination of things dealing with issues of racism in this country against Black people predominantly. The farm workers had started organizing in California, so that's going on. And the Great Boycott started towards the end of the 60s, and the Vietnam War movement. And then, of course, the women's movement emerges in the middle of all of that. And shortly thereafter, the gay movement. So that's kind of how I can't think of a time when I wasn't, you know, involved in stuff.
Yeah. So that was New York. How did you get to the Bay?
Well, my parents lived in New York and my family was in New York, although they had attempted to relocate to Washington State, but it had been unsuccessful because of the McCarthy era. So I was born in Washington State. So when I had a chance to go back, I went to Antioch College for a little while, and I had a co-op job in Portland. And then I went back to Portland with some friends to open the Women's Center in Portland in 1970-ish, 69, 70, and then moved to Seattle, and then a lot of traipsing back and forth, and eventually lived in Seattle until 78 when we moved down here as a collective.
You mentioned McCarthy. Were your parents activists?
Yes, they had been activists before World War II. My mom had been in the Communist Party, as had her brother, and my dad had been in the teachers union in New York, which was listed as a communist front organization. And so they had been activists.
So they were like on some lists, probably.
Well, yeah. And there was a pretty bad McCarthy era in Washington and Oregon. I met somebody in Portland who had been a communist, in the 50s, and he said he got shot out on the street. The Washington State school superintendent, Pearl Wanamaker, got ousted in an election because she was attacked by Westbrook Pegler, and personally, he was one of the big anti-communist columnists nationwide. And my dad, who was working for the Department of Education at the time, left because everybody left. Everybody lost their jobs. So he moved back to New York, where his family was. So it was pretty different for the people who were the political people, because it was a really difficult time for them.
Sure.
In order to join the military, my mom had to deny that she'd ever been a communist. She joined after Hitler abrogated the Stalin-Hitler Pact, right, and attacked Russia. And in order to join, she had to sign a loyalty oath that said she'd never been a communist. And give references. So she gave references who either knew she had been a communist or nothing about what she was doing. When the McCarthy era happened, people were in a really bad state about it. And, there were people who were testifying and people who were refusing to testify and people who were being thrown in prison, people who were losing their jobs. It was a huge debacle.
Do you think the kind of censorship around Palestine does it compare to your conception of McCarthy era was like?
Okay, I was a kid.
Right?
A little kid. I mean, well, my mom told me when I first started getting involved in politics, I probably have told you this before. She said, no matter what group you were in, no matter what you're doing, somebody on the Central Committee is in the FBI.
Good advice.
Advice to live by. Try not to be in organizations that have central committees. I think that means.
Did that, like your mom's advice, did that affect you wanting to be part of like a strict communist front?
No, I was briefly in a Marxist-Leninist party, Workers' World Party, until we got kicked out. Over being way too anarchist for them.
Okay.
They couldn't cope, and we couldn't cope. So our whole branch was disbanded, and that was that.
And so you moved to Washington, you came down. Do you remember what the first activist group that you were part of in the Bay was?
Well, there was an informal group of us who formed around Nazi rally that was going to be held in Walnut Creek in like 1980, maybe. So we organized something for that. I also joined a group called Solidarity, Lesbian, Gay Liberation. By the time I joined it, it was at the end of its Coors boycott work. It had been kind of the main motive force around the Coors boycott. I think it had tried to fill the vacancy left by the kind of the disintegration of Bagel.
Bay Area gays and lesbians talked to Charlie about that.
Oh, yeah. When did he say it died?
It was early 80s when he left, and then he stopped doing activism for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, the groups were kind of, we had a real problem because we had a guy in our group who was in the Socialist Workers Party who we had agreed to not give our mailing list when it was demanded by somebody doing some kind of law enforcement investigation regarding Coors, I think. Whenever they said, we said, no, we're not going to give it to them. And then he turned around and did put a big damper on things.
And for people who don't know, could you talk about the gist of the Coors boycott?
Well, Coors was being boycotted for a number of reasons. One is there was a union boycott about Coors, which I'm not sure if it ever got resolved. I don't know if Coors became a union company or not, but there was a long struggle around that. Now I'd have to go back in history and look about why we were boycotting Coors. There was good reason.
The Wikipedia says they were using a polygraph test during the hiring process, according to Wikipedia, and based on what Charlie remembered, which they alleged allowed them to discriminate against LGBT individuals. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Damn, that must have been so expensive to conduct all that shit. Anyway, okay.
I don't remember this thing about lie detectors. I remember this issue about discrimination with Coors, but I don't remember this issue about lie detectors. I came into the group as the Coors boycott was kind of winding down.
Resolving. Okay.
So Charlie's probably much more knowledgeable about it than I am.
Were you ever a big beer drinker?
Well, I never drank Coors. It tasted only slightly better than Olympia beer. which was better
Ali.
than near beer.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So then LAGAI happens. And were you one of the founders?
So what happens is my personal route was not the El Salvador initiative in 1983. Israel invaded invaded Lebanon in 1982, like in June or something. May or June. And then in September, there was the Sabra and Shatila massacres, where the Israeli occupation forces allowed the Phalangist right-wing militia, Christian militia, to come in and like massacre like thousands of Palestinians in these refugee camps. And we formed a group around that time. I don't know I think it was before the actual massacre at Sabra and Shatila, and it was called Jews Against the U.S.-Israeli Invasion. And so we formed that in 1982. And there were some other people also doing stuff around it. And then there were 3 other groups that were primarily Jews, or all Jews, and all women, or lesbians, or dykes, or butches, or whatever gender identity people had. And we came together, the 4 groups came together and formed a group called Jewish Women for a Secular Middle East, which eventually realized that we were all lesbians. And so, although we didn't change the name, when we would describe the group, we'd say it was a lesbian group. There were maybe 30 or 40 active people in that. So I was involved in that. And then we were doing stuff around Palestine and around Lebanon because, the Israeli occupation of Lebanon continued until like 1990. And it was a huge, terrible thing. I mean, as was the rest of things in Palestine. And Jewish Women for a Secular Middle East worked with the Palestinian Women's Organization had a brief organization we formed with them called Tadaman, which means solidarity in Arabic. And I'm no doubt pronouncing it wrong. And we did work around political prisoners in Palestine and some other issues.
How did you come to be in the groups? Did you, I don't know, see a flyer somewhere, or do you remember?
Oh, I just remember getting together with people I knew and organizing the groups.
Which is,
people who were in Jews Against the U.S. Israeli Invasion, for example, are now in Quit, like Amanda.
Yeah.
Or Julie, who's quit and LAGAI adjacent, So, I mean, there's people who we knew through political work saying, like, let's form a group. And then a few other people would join. It was just people getting together and saying, okay, let's organize this thing. And then you put it out and some other people might come along and join it. And I think that's how the other 3 groups who formed Jewish Women for a Secular Middle East, that's what we called, that was how the acronym spelled out. They were like study groups that had been formed among friends and stuff like that, but people who knew each other. Some of them were people left over from Jews Against Zionism, a group here in the, I think, 70s maybe. Some of those people have now gone on and they're involved in Jewish Voice for Peace. There's kind of these same activists. They're not the only people, but these same activists you can trace back to like the late 60s or early 70s all the way through to today doing this work.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what is really, I think, special about organizing in the Bay. I'm sure it exists in other cities, but the lineage, like you said. So with LAGAI, were you one of the originals?
No, the original group of LAGAI were the people who were working around, I think it was Proposition or Measure N in San Francisco that demanded a withdrawal of U.S. troops from El Salvador and the ending of military aid to U.S. military, weapons to El Salvador. So there was a LGBT, or maybe it was just a lesbian and gay at the time, committee or organizing, group of them, task force, whatever they were called, something like that. And when the campaign was over, which was successful, they went on and decided to form LAGAI. And I first met LAGAI. They did a program at the very beginning of 1984, like a program about solidarity and stuff like that, international solidarity. And so I went to that, and that's when I first got to know them. And then Jewish Women for a Secular Middle East had a nasty little breakup in that we had decided to define ourselves as a lesbian group, and then a woman who would not necessarily have been identified as a lesbian by appearance went to represent us at a national meeting in New York and specifically didn't identify it as a lesbian group. And some of us got mad, and it became a whole brouhaha, as everything did in the 1980s. And so then I was looking for a place to go. So then I joined LAGAI because I wanted to be in a place that was openly queer.
Cool. Yeah. So LAGAI was, obviously it's right there in the name.
Yep.
Hard to miss it. You mentioned that there was like a convening around international solidarity. Do you remember what it was like and like what drew you in?
I believe, like most programs, it was a little more speeches than I would have chosen to have. But I have the flyer from it from February 11th, 1984 called
Ooh, tight.
Alliances, Lesbians, and Gay Men in Solidarity, Spanish and English.
Yeah, I've seen that one. I
Yeah.
must have borrowed it from you at one point. So too many speeches.
I'm sure it was.
But
I'm
you
sure it
had
was
friends
lovely.
there.
I mean, I'm sure it was
For sure, for
lovely.
sure.
I
People
mean,
got a lot to say.
and music, poetry, and dance by Caribbeana, etc., and the theater premiere of Gay Gorillas. So, I mean, it was, it was a long thing. It
Cool.
was,
Oh, so there were like kind of entry points for people if they
yeah,
liked movies, if they liked, whatever
it
the
was a
music
big,
was like.
it was a big cultural event. It was at the Mission Cultural Center, so it was a big event. And at the time, the people who were in LAGAI, some of them were pretty high profile in the community, like Teddy Matthews and Miriam Abrams, who was with the Women's Philharmonic, and some other people who were a little more high profile at the time, as well as some really dedicated Central American activists or Latin American activists. So, and then of course there was the split in LAGAI that led when because they were forming the Victoria Mercado Brigade to do solidarity work in Nicaragua. We eventually helped to build I believe, a community center. Had a gay work team go down to Nicaragua and help build a community center.
So that was like kind of cross-cultural exchange wherein activists down there were requesting that people from the US come down and learn more about the struggle and also help out with their hands.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, it was modeled on the Vence Ramos Brigade without the anti-gay stuff.
And Teddy Matthews in 2013, when Greg Yeomans put out his book about Teddy Matthews, who was, as you said, somewhat infamous from being on maybe like the first PBS special, almost like a reality show featuring gay people's stories.
It certainly is believable. I knew somebody who lived in the same apartment building with him in the 60s. And, at that time, Teddy was a pretty active in the drag queen community and stuff. And, he was pretty high profile.
So he brought some of the drag people into the activism, would you say?
No, I don't think so. I think that was his thing. But I mean, there were people. At the time that I joined LAGAI, it occupied a place in the movement that was similar to the place in the movement that Gay Shame has been in, where we had meetings. Actually, used to have meetings at Modern Times on a regular basis, and people would just drop in, to see if they want to be in it, and they'd leave, or they'd, whatever. A few would stick, many would come and just kind of see. People would come to demonstrate. It was that kind of a place for the most radical set of the queer community: anti-authoritarian, anarchist, some kind of economic justice approach, anti-racist, feminist, whatever.
Yeah, the ones that sometimes don't make it onto the flyer or into the article.
Right.
So Teddy Matthews was one of the people that started it. Do you remember who else was there at the very beginning?
Well, Carol Senna was there. Cole was there. I'm not sure when Lucrecia joined, but fairly early on, Lucrecia Bermudez. Lisa Raffel was in at some point. I don't know when. I have various old phone trees, something that nobody has anymore, from the times that I joined. Different people were there. I don't exactly remember when Horacio joined.
What was a phone tree for people who aren't familiar?
What was a phone tree? So if there was an emergency that we needed to go out and respond to, like, have an emergency demonstration or to let people know about something, there was a tree that you called so-and-so and someone calls that person called the next person, the next person, the next person. And if you were smart in how you constructed your phone tree, there was kind of branching so that you didn't lose. If you lost one person on the tree, you didn't get anywhere with it. So it was just a way to spread information, not necessarily even emergency information, just, like, we need to have a meeting, or this thing has gone wrong, or this thing has gone right, whatever.
Yeah, amazing. It was possible to contact people pre-Signal. For sure.
True.
So it sounded like a cultural event, bringing new people in, celebrating the El Salvador initiative. I don't know if celebrating is the correct word, but that first meeting, what was the first action, do you remember, that you were part of in LAGAI?
No, because there were so many demonstrations about Central America that would be going on. I mean, it was a pretty straight line of demonstrations from Gays for Nicaragua through to the El Salvador. I mean, stuff was so terrible in Central America. So there would be, I really couldn't remember the first demonstration I was at with LAGAI per se.
Did you ever consider going down to El Salvador or anywhere in Central America?
No, not really. There were LAGAI adjacent people like Rebecca who went down on Witness for Peace to Nicaragua during the Contra times, which is later, and she wrote about it. But I'm not a traveler.
Did you work as a union organizer at the time?
No, I was working at the post office at the time. I mean, I was a rank and file participant in my union, eventually became the union's health and safety rep.
Did
But
you
it's all
ever
rank and file unpaid stuff.
did you ever have to call in sick to get to an action?
Never called in sick to get to an action. I might take off the day, but I would never call in sick. That just wouldn't be smart working for the post office.
So and this is around the time that HIV enters the conversation in San Francisco. Did that affect, I don't know, how many people were able to show up to actions as the 80s dragged on?
No, it just affected so with lesbian gay solidarity, two of the main people, Jim McManus and Donald, I don't remember his last name, they decided to move out of town to get away from the epidemic, which did not work, actually. And Jim got sick, and we saw him at the 87 March on Washington, and I think he was very sick at the time. It had already begun to affect it. I think 84 is when they closed the bathhouses. And there was the Bathhouse Coalition that some of us went to, mobilization against AIDS. In 1986, and we went down to support the AIDS Vigil, which I think maybe started in 85, the AIDS Arc Vigil, where the two guys chained themselves to the doors of the Social Security building at Civic Center. And they established an occupation that lasted for 10 years. The initial demand was Social Security benefits for people with ARC, because they only were giving Social Security benefits to people who had, quote, full-blown AIDS, as they would call it. There were a lot of people who went from not having who were infected, who had AIDS-related complex, as they called it, died with AIDS-related complex, and they couldn't get Social Security benefits. So initially that was part of the focus, was to get benefits from that.
You said a 10-year occupation?
Yeah, I think so. It was,
damn.
I mean, they had for a while, for maybe the first 5 years, they had a lot of tents down at UN Plaza. I mean, wow. A lot of houseless people ended up joining the occupation. Those two men, I don't know how long they particularly stayed locked down for. But there would be various demonstrations to support the vigil, and LAGAI was in that. In 87, one of the things the Central America activists were doing, the religious people in particular were doing, was blocking the railroad tracks to the Concord Naval Weapons Station. And in 1987, Brian Wilson was one of them. He was kneeling on the tracks and did not get out. The train did not stop. Generally speaking, the trains would stop because the demonstrators were there. The train did not stop. Most of the demonstrators were able to, jump out of the way, but for whatever reason, he was not, and he lost both legs. And that was in September of 87. And a couple of days after, we had a big demonstration out there where some people tore up the tracks and did all kinds of stuff. And at that point, we handed out a flyer called, I think it was 100,000 Dead from AIDS, Where Were You? Where we were saying to the essentially straight movement, you're not paying any attention to the fact that gay people are dying. In 86, we had already done the Stand Together campaign against the LaRouche AIDS Quarantine Initiative, and probably the first of the English-only initiatives. And one was 64 and one was 65, or one was 63 and one was 64. And the mainstream campaign around the LaRouche initiative didn't do any grassroots organizing. It was just buying ads on TV with actors in white coats saying, I'm a doctor and I'm concerned about how this initiative would impact on our ability to control this epidemic, blah, blah, blah. And so LAGAI initiated a coalition that wanted to fight against both the English only and the AIDS Quarantine Initiative together. And we had a pretty big participation in that. And we ran 2 campaigns that included some people canvassing and some precincts in the mission to oppose the 2 initiatives. And we had a whole big guerrilla theater component where we did actions downtown and handed out flyers in gibberish and said, whatever.
Wait, so with the English only initiative, that was what, in schools?
No, I think that was in everything. It was a pretty broad, sweeping initiative that eventually got passed. The AIDS Quarantine Initiative failed. In the precincts where we did canvassing as compared to adjacent precincts where we didn't, both initiatives failed worse than they did in adjacent. So thus showing, I guess, that it made some effect that we were doing canvassing. But the English only initiative got pretty much thrown out by the courts as it affected going to hospitals, and it did affect schools, but it was broader than schools. And there were several other English-only initiatives that followed that one, as there were other AIDS initiatives that followed that one.
Yeah, LaRouche, I didn't know that he was the one to put forth that initiative, which, I mean, the idea was to, yeah, literally put people with HIV in camps, sort of.
Yeah,
He has some buy-in with, like, I guess people who'd consider themselves on the left.
he does.
Isn't that, yeah, I mean,
I mean,
like,
he came from the left. He was, what was his name?
oh, okay. Lyndon LaRouche.
He came from some group who would lecture us about how we needed to return to the gold standard.
Apparently, he was this Trotskyist in the 50s.
Yeah, I was in some kind of a coalition that his group was in. They became this like weird right-wing sect, and they would talk all this economic gibberish at us even then. So, but he's had stopped being a leftist long before that.
And okay, so the first actions like came one after another about US intervention in Central America.
Right, because
intervention seems like such a light word at this point to typify what was happening down there. How did you get the information out of Central America that you all were reacting to at the time? Like, today, obviously, people are at least somewhat aware of the censorship that goes on around Palestine in corporate media. I was wondering, like, how much of the information did it feel like was coming, like, you could get in the mainstream, and how much was coming from like individuals coming up, people with family members in Central America, like speaking to what the US was doing in Central America?
Right. I mean, there would be, people would come up here on speaking tours that would be arranged. There were solidarity groups, like there up here, there was GNIB, right? Guatemala News and Information Bureau, which for many, many, many years had been getting out the news about what was going on in Guatemala, which was, just horrible. So that was one way, was just, there were different groups who were kind of aimed at getting information out. At one point there was Liberation News Service, but so there would be these ways that stuff would get out by either, KPFA News or any of the other alternate media news sources. We would find out about stuff. We might not find out about it right away. Then there was stuff that we would react to. One of LAGAI's earlier missions was to support queer people in other countries who would be targeted. One of these groups did a demonstration when there was the Egyptian queen, there had been a drag party on a boat, and some people had been arrested by the military. I'd have to look into the history of it and get you the article. We have an article about it, but we would find out about stuff until Eaglehurst formed, International Lesbian and Gay Human Rights Commission, took over most of this work. One of the things that LAGAI was doing was just having demonstrations to support queer people in Latin America who were being targeted or were being victimized and stuff. So,
yeah.
I mean, information got out through all the ways that information used to get out, either by underground papers, by word of mouth, by people knowing people and getting contacted by them. Just like even now, we're getting emails from friends who are in contact with people who are in Gaza who are saying, and this is what's happening to my brother, and then you get the story about the brother and his family, as compared to what ends up on CBS News or even on the internet. So you get it that way.
Yeah. And in turn, you all started a long-running newspaper, potentially the largest circulation newspaper that gets headed into prisons and jails, period, like queer or not. And that is UltraViolet. When did you all start that project?
In 1988, when the U.S. was having this ongoing war with everybody in Central America, and it invaded Honduras, and there was a big outcry in this country against, expanding that war. And so there was LAGAI and friends organized a queer demonstration as part of like a week worth of everybody yelling at going around. And we also had we had a friend who was working for HERE, who was trying to organize the Park 55, which had broken with San Francisco's downtown hotel tradition of being unionized.
So the Hotel Workers Union here.
HERE, hotel employees and restaurant employees. They were having sit-ins there, kind of tame sit-ins there outside to protest and stuff. So we had a friend who was working on that project, and we knew about that. We did a demonstration in downtown San Francisco, including walking through the Park 55 and walking through the lobby and stuff like that, and being pursued by the cops and into the parking garage, and nobody got arrested and everything was fine. And we looked around and we said, wow, where did these people come from? Like we're used to seeing, we know about 30 people who are activists around Central America, and here's like 1,000 people who are coming out for Central America. So we decided to start a newsletter, which we called Out, Other newspapers were not called out at the time, so we called it Out. And the idea was basically that people would write up organizing that they were doing, us and other people, and can use it to communicate with each other. One of the groups which we organized with on a kind of long-term basis, Out of Control, did one page of the newsletter, and then they mailed that out because it was 8.5 by 14 at the time, and they would mail that out separately as Out of Time. So that's how it got started. And that was good because we had somebody who was Xeroxing it for free for us at his job. And that's a very good way to start a publication. And then he left, and we no longer had free Xeroxing. And we continued to pay for Xeroxing for a little while. And then we ran into a problem with the post office and whether we could mail it or not. And so we ended up going to a tabloid. And when we went to a tabloid, we decided to rename it UltraViolet. And that was in 90 something. And that's what it's been for the last 20 something years.
Sweet. So the money point, like the groups that you were organizing with, it sounds like for the most part, were not operating with big budgets. They weren't necessarily incorporated, no LLC papers. Is that by design? The idea, like, did LAGAI ever consider becoming a 501c3?
No, that was not we're not volunteers, we're activists. If you're a 501c3, you have a board, you have paid staff, and you have volunteers. We're not that. We're a group of activists who are organizing around the things that we want to organize about, trying to have the politics that we want to have, and talk to other people about the politics that they want to have, and, figure out the best actions we can do. And, that's what we do. We couldn't be a nonprofit. There's no nonprofitness to what we do. I mean, there's no profit, but there's no need to shelter anything from the taxes either. So, I mean, it's all money that occasionally LAGAI used to do benefits. It used to be a point of unity that there were no poetry, no slides, because of our history with Central America, where all the benefits were, slides of people that here we are sitting on the road, here we are sitting on the road, here we are. I have a picture of my mom when she was organizing with the CIO sitting on a road with her friends. The sitting on the road is just something that happens, I guess. So, yeah. But we would have benefits and stuff. And that was one way we raised money. Occasionally, we've gotten a grant from Resist. We just got a grant from a trans
Justice Funding Project. Yeah.
And
you're going to get that re-upped?
Yeah, we hope so.
Tight.
Yeah, so mostly we pay for the newsletter. We pay for UltraViolet. The big cost for UltraViolet is mailing it into the prisons. We mail about 2,000 copies each issue into the prisons, and stamps are expensive. And that's what costs us more than the printing. And everything else is volunteer. It's unpaid, and it's what we do as part of our work.
If you all ever need help with the layout, let me know. Like laying shit out if someone gets sick or whatever, or wants to collab. I've been meaning to mention that for a while, but I used to handle the redesign of the Abolitionists, which I guess they continued with a CR paper.
Hello again, everyone. This is Tofu here, editor of the show, and I'm here to talk to you about our Patreon. If you want to support the show to help us pay for the editing, labor, hosting services, and equipment, you can go to patreon.com/SadFrancisco. Our patrons will have early access to episodes 3 days before the actual episode goes public. Toshio and I are doing our best to improve the quality of the show to our community, so we can't thank y'all enough for the support. You can go ahead and follow us on our TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube channel for additional content and any updates for the show. Now back to Deej and Toshio.
Okay, so throughout LAGAI's history, at a certain point, you all started to go by LAGAI-Queer Insurrection, and that was sort of nod or whatever to the fact that your scope had always been pretty wide, and you weren't just focusing on Latin American solidarity actions, although that's something that has always been part of LAGAI. But when did the queer insurrection get added on? So look,
for the late 1980s and early 1990s, we were a major part of the group who organized Stop AIDS Now or Else, who did the Bay Bridge blockade. We did the San Francisco Center action. We did an action at INS, which is now ICE. And we did the Stop the Opera action in September of 1989, I guess. We did large, like what we called mass clandestine actions, where the big thing was to keep them secret, not that they were highly illegal. It just wouldn't happen if people knew about them. So then from that, we met the ACT UP people, and we ended up being in ACT UP.
Would you say, like you're one of the few people that were at both the first ever blockade of the Golden Gate Bridge and also of the Bay Bridge.
Yeah, but I wasn't
Happened.
at the one. I wasn't at the Black Seed one.
Okay. Gotcha. That was like the first blockade that I know of the Bay Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge blockade was at 82.
Well, that was the first blockade. That was in 89.
89, sorry.
The Golden Gate Bridge blockade was in January of 89.
Thank you for remembering all these dates. And yeah.
Well, that one I remember independently. We had actually aimed to do it at the end of 88, but we weren't able to do it then. It was both bad weather and we were afraid that we had been discovered. So we had to put it off and reorganize.
What was the thought of being discovered about?
Well, why did we?
How did you? Yeah. What was that?
We decided to have, so we had all these different meetings that we would have at like houses where where we'd put the phone in the refrigerator, and we'd meet at houses of people who weren't involved in the action and weren't involved in actions at all and did all these things. So, and people were organized in task groups, like you were gonna help get the banner up, or you were gonna walk onto the bridge, or you were gonna, whatever. So people they weren't called affinity groups because they were just tasks of this bigger thing. There was the drivers, or all the things like that went into the organizing. And we decided to have one big meeting the night before. I'm not sure why we decided to do that. And we rented a room in a motel. And then we were watching people go into the meeting, and there was a bar to that hotel. And there were people there who looked like undercover cops, the way they used to look in the 80s. Thick shoes and, whatever. And so we decided that the action wasn't secure. And so some of us in the logistics committee went off to reorganize the logistics and let people know. And we canceled it. The only person we didn't let know was Mike, what's his name? Mike Alcalay, who was a reporter who has died for KPFA, who had been the only reporter we had invited to come onto the bridge with us. And we did not let him know. So he was there in the rain by himself, but that was a mistake. But there were a couple of us who went there to make sure nobody didn't show up by mistake. So he didn't like stay out there for hours waiting. And so anyways, that's why we thought it had been blown. And because we relied on the element of surprise, just like any kind of action like that does, we decided that we had to reschedule and redo it and be a little more careful about the security of organizing, which we did.
For that and a lot of the other actions that you have been part of, how does that breaking up of the tasks go? I mean, this is such a very, very basic sort of like organizing strategies question, but I think an important one that people are always interested in knowing about. In Gay Shame, like people will volunteer. Sometimes people will volunteer other people, but usually there is consent. I wanted to ask about so there weren't these affinity groups, as you said, for the Golden Gate Bridge action, but with all of these big actions that do require a lot of time and planning and so many different people to maybe document it, people to talk to the media, people to do security, people to potentially liaison with the cops. I'm thinking of like a nonprofit model, like there's already these cemented roles that people generally play, and yet you don't really have nonprofits out here completing blockade of the largest bridge on the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends. Like I've been part of some of the, like the stuff at the beginning of the Iraq War, right? Where there would be these clusters and there were spokes councils meetings and stuff like that. So one model of organizing, which LAGAI has been part of, is where we function as an affinity group. And at one point in LAGAI, there were a couple of different affinity groups who were involved. Purple Rain was involved, and there were people in Purple Rain who were in LAGAI back in the AIDS days.
What was Purple Rain?
It was a gay men's affinity group who was doing Central America work initially, and then they started to do AIDS activist work, and then they became part of Citizens for Medical Justice, which was a precursor to ACT UP. They were the ones who took over the Burroughs Welcome Building. Remember, they climbed up on the roof of the Burroughs Welcome Building in 87, maybe. Had a march from San Francisco all the way to Burlingame or San Mateo, Burlingame, I think, and then went up onto the top of the building and held banners and stuff about the price of AZT, right? So there's that kind of way where you say, this is a decentralized action and people are all coming from affinity groups, and somebody from each affinity group will come and speak, be part of a spokes council And this is a model that was developed, really came to fruition with the Livermore Action Group, which some of the people who were in LAGAI were part of the Livermore Action Group. Not me, but some of those people were. So there's that model of organizing, right, where you're just starting out as affinity groups.
Was that about nuclear?
Yeah, the nuclear stuff.
Disarmament? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, research in nuclear weapons and stuff like that at Lawrence Livermore.
And so people were blocking the roads to get in and out. Yeah.
And they did that for many, many years. I mean, I think there are still activists in the area who still do stuff there. And that's also true for groups who've done stuff around the School of the Americas and stuff around the Nevada test site. So there are groups like that, in which there are affinity groups who do a lot of these things, and a lot coming from the anti-war and anti-nuclear movement.
Yeah.
So, but Stop AIDS Everywhere Else wasn't organized like that, but it had people from different affinity groups and stuff. So when we went to recruit people, when there was a big meeting of like 40 people on the floor in an apartment in the Haight somewhere to organize the Golden Gate Bridge blockade at the end of the summer of '88, with the idea of doing a high profile action prior to the AIDS convocation that was going to happen in late '88 in DC, which the National Act Now was formed. And people were there from different groups. Like there were people from Women Against Imperialism, there were people from LAGAI, there were people from Citizens for Medical Justice, there were people from other people with AIDS organizations. You know, there was a Stop AIDS project. There were a bunch of other people with AIDS organizations at the time, all bundled into this room and trying to figure stuff out. And then from that, people formed into committees like media and logistics and stuff like that. And that was pretty much people choosing what they felt like working on.
Yeah.
And then from there, as the plan developed, because we had several more meetings told we had a plan to develop, and the logistics job was to kind of develop a plan that would allow us to block the Bay Bridge the Golden Gate Bridge without hopefully anybody being thrown off into the water or in any other way severely damaged, and could effectively block a bridge that goes in two directions. So you had to block all the lanes at the same point, or you wouldn't have blocked the bridge. But then people went to kind of established contacts that they had. What we would say is, I want to tell you about an action. You don't have to agree to do it, but you do have to agree. If I'm going to tell you about it, you have to agree not to talk about it to anybody until the actions actually happen. And that was the understanding that we did that not on the phone, and we didn't have the signal, and there was no signal at the time. There weren't really handheld cell phones at the time. There were car phones, but people didn't all have cell phones at the time. And, you know, so it was all done in person, and people recruited within the networks that they had. And then you talked about what roles there were. There were some meetings where people got kind of brought up to speed on the action. And then there were meetings of the specific task groups that you were going to be in. And people just assorted themselves into what specific task they wanted to do. If you didn't have enough people to do a task, you had to think about what's wrong with that task, right? I mean, if you don't have enough people to voluntarily do a task that you feel needs to be done, then you need to think about, can you structure the action in a way that task becomes more attractive, you know, or less whatever is the reason that people don't want to do it, or can you structure the action in a different way so that task isn't necessary? So, I mean, because nobody can tell anybody to do anything, right? It's just, you're doing it because you want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that was a really good way of like laying out some of the organizing of the action in terms for people that don't know or have never thought that they were at least part of an action like this. What roles are your favorite? What roles do you feel like you end up playing most often at actions?
Well, I like logistics the best because it's like playing it's like a puzzle, and, figuring out how are we going to do this thing? How can we stop the traffic in two directions? It's kind of interesting. I don't like media. I really hate I hate messaging. I hate arguing with people about whether the word is going to be must or shall. I feel like I would tear out my hair if I had to do that.
Well, I appreciate you even spending this time with me, considering the media part.
Well, no, it's not that. I just don't like arguing with people about the intricacy of messaging.
The branding, yeah.
Like, should we say this way or that way? Because the fact is, everybody who reads the flyer that we have just spent 10 hours struggling about whether we're going to say they or we isn't paying the slightest bit of attention to all that time that we put into arguing and breaking up over whether this is going to be the first demand or the second demand. It's not like I don't actually care about the politics. It's just it drives me a little nuts. So I never volunteer for that. I'll do police spokes because it's something that I feel like I can do as well as anybody else can do. I mean, since it's mostly just a delaying tactic, giving them somebody to talk to and whatever. I mean, it's scary to deal with the cops, but so it just depends. I mean, I like demonstrations. I like doing guerrilla theater. I like acting out, being a cop in guerrilla theater or any of those things. It's all fun, drawing signs. Really, really bad at handwriting.
Yeah, there are plenty of people who have really good handwriting out there that could play that role instead. So with doing the Latin American solidarity actions, were there often targets that were recurring? Like, today I think of like gay shame, like Scott Wiener comes up a lot, Manny.
Flood building was a center because all the consulates were there. Then, of course, we had the Concord Naval Weapons Station, right? People were targeting. I don't remember the Central America stuff being that oriented towards a specific, like, local politician or something like that. A lot of gay shame is targeting stuff because a lot of what we're dealing with is gentrification and local issues. I mean, Scott Wiener has terrible politics on any issue, pretty much. Occasionally, he ends up on what appears to be the right side of something, like the bill about trans rights in prison. But then somehow or another, nothing ever happens with it anyway. So I guess it's okay for him to be on that side. But it's the international work's a little different. But it's also true, like LAGAI's done a lot of other stuff than we do. International solidarity remains a part of LAGAI's work and an important part of LAGAI's work. LAGAI formed QUIT, and it has in the past formed Dagger with other groups and other people as a way to deal with that particular work. But it's still work that LAGAI thinks of as its work. But we also, we have a major campaign around the death penalty that we did for like 20 years once they resumed executions in California.
For the record, could you state what Dagger stands for and what QUIT stands for?
Okay, so Dykes and Gay Guys Emergency Response was formed when Bush was going to attack Iraq for the first time, the first Iraq War and the first Bush. And then some of us are still working in ACT UP. And so ACT UP was part of that. Some people from ACT UP were part of that. People from Prayer Fire were part of that. So that was Dagger. And then QUIT was formed with the Second Intifada, Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, with an exclamation point at the end of the acronym. In between the Dagger time and the QUIT time, the work just went back to LAGAI to keep going with Palestine activism and other international activism. We've done some stuff. We did work in solidarity with the anti-apartheid activists in South Africa, and we've done just a lot of different international work because all issues are queer issues, and any place people are being oppressed, that's our problem. So we've actually done a lot of work around a lot of different countries. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's frustrating that people still have a question around like, oh, why are you as a queer person, interested in, supporting this action? Right. And yeah, it all goes back to there are queer people everywhere. And yeah, oppression is, it's shit. Exactly. We were out looking at Christmas lights last night and in Pacifica, and we drove by this house who had more things in the yard than you'd ever imagine, right? And it's not a huge yard, but it had a lot of things. It had like Santa Clauses, and it had this and it had that. And in the middle of it, they had a big Palestine flag, and they had bought a neon thing of a Palestine flag that they had mounted above in the center of their house that said "Free Palestine." Yeah, we, like all of the city hall, lit up red and green, right? And just accidentally, right? And with the regular white lights on the side, right? Clearly for Palestine. Totally. I didn't know London Breed was that much of an activist. Yeah. Well, Eric said that he's been seeing online like a lot of, I don't know, I guess Zionists have accidentally taken certain things to be, and especially, people assume that San Francisco is 100% for Palestine. God, so I guess people true. Online, are confused. Who has been in LAGAI the longest, if you know, and who the shortest? Because I do want to talk about the longevity, which is super impressive. I've been in it the longest, either through death or leaving. And the shortest who stayed is Tori. There have been other people who've come in and gone and come in and gone. So those people aren't there. So I can't say. But that is one of the problems for LAGAI. it is hard to join a group who's been in existence for 40 years.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, yeah, like the fact that you all are continuing to plan these actions to like regularly send a newspaper inside to do all of these things, the continuity of that, it is like something special. So I know the answer to this, but for the record, outside of planning actions, I do like to have friends who I'm friends with you. We might as well build activism into hanging out. You do hang out outside of, I guess, things that would be considered like straight up organizing, like, going to the movies and shit like that. Has that always been the case? Do you feel like with the queer organizing that you've done in the Bay that you're attracted to that? Yeah, that seems to have longevity.
I mean, I think, Quit, which has more new members, right? It continually gets new members, and it's a more, I mean, if you were to say, which is in some ways Quit is overlap with LAGAI. And so within LAGAI, there are people who see each other more and see each other less, but but it's a smaller group. And so we do tend to see each other a lot. Within Quit, some of those friendship groups, there are specific friendship groups that maybe don't include everybody in the group. And that's kind of normal, and yeah, of course, you're spending a lot of when you're doing political work that you care about as compared to, like, I don't know, being in the Democratic Party, what do I know? But when you're doing this kind of grassroots political work, it is your life. And, you want to be with people who share your values. And of course, I have friends who aren't in LAGAI or any other group that I'm working with, but also some friends who aren't, people I've met through work, people I've met through whatever, who I've known for like 1,000 years. But really the people who you live with are the people who share your values and who want to do the same stuff. So yeah, you're going to spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah. I think, that like just kind of innate desire, that like drive to want to make the world, slightly better. With the nonprofit jobs that I've had, certainly there's a lot of, I don't know, administrative like bullshit and going through the motions, busy work that really can drain any fulfillment aspects that organizing has. Did you ever consider going to work for a nonprofit that was doing the kind of like solidarity work that you were interested in, or like an AIDS foundation or anything like that?
Well, A, I don't know that I ever would have had the opportunity to do any of that. And B, no. The only time I've ever had a job that had anything to do with what I believe in and stuff was when I went to work for Cal OSHA. Before that, I was a mechanic. I was, I had a lot of jobs. I had 40 something jobs. I worked at the post, a lot of jobs. And I did not love the part of Cal OSHA that was dealing with something that I actually cared about, because you can't do what you actually care about when you're working for the state. But I liked the fact that you could close a place down. So it was kind of mixed, and you could force employers to fix something. I liked that part. And I liked going to see people's workplaces. I always liked that. Even when I was a vending mechanic, I liked going into people's workplaces and, seeing what was going on and stuff like that. When it wasn't my workplace, because all I had to do was fix the vending machine. Excellent job fixing vending machines. I recommend it to anybody. But no, I never wanted to do that, because it's, like I said, I want to overthrow the government. I'm not actually interested in making a deal with London Breed to have her be a little bit better to some group of people. I understand there are nonprofits who do it. I don't say they're doing anything terrible. It is not something I want to do. I want to overthrow the government. I still want to overthrow the government. I wanted to overthrow the government when I was 10. I want to overthrow it now. It won't happen in my lifetime, I guess, but it will happen in someone's lifetime. I mean, and hopefully I want to overthrow the government to create a humane and decent society, not to create fascism. So, that's they're not going to fund that. I mean, I'm grateful that Resist gives us a little bit of money. I'm grateful that the Transgender Justice Project gives us a little money. Let's send the newsletter into the prisons, and I'm grateful for that. But if they weren't to give us money, we would still do it.
Right. Yeah, that's the big part of it. Obviously, I'm getting funded by a billionaire right now. And yeah, it's like really that is the central thing, is just like, would you do the work regardless of whether or not you're getting paid? Let's see.
They're never going to pay you to do the thing you actually want to do. I mean, that's the fact. It's just, you need to be free to envision the world you want to make and to create that.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, when you get one of these jobs, it feels like it's a payoff to not not completely upend, like a promise to not completely upend the power structures that
Yeah, I mean,
exist.
there was a pamphlet that came out in 1967 from
The Ozarks,
from Appalachia, actually.
Appalachian, sorry.
It was
Next different mountain chain.
it was romantic Appalachia, poverty pays if you're not poor.
Yes, we spoke about this last time, and
Just, I think you could take that and you can apply that to any decade that I've lived in. It's just I did have friends who worked for the Black Lung Association, but they worked there for 6 months.
What's the Black Lung Association?
Well, the union that represents coal miners in the 60s was very corrupt, and Tony Boyle was the president. And there was this whole problem with black lung with the introduction of this machinery called the perfect miner, that was created this whole epidemic of black lung disease, which wasn't compensated in West Virginia, and particularly in West Virginia and the areas around there. So the Black Lung Association formed to both force change in the union and to force compensation for black lung and to force cleaner conditions in the mine so that people weren't getting this disease, because it was a terribly disabling disease. So that's what it was called. Eventually, they did manage to change the leadership of the United Mine Workers. Didn't they? Somebody got killed in that process. And, and they got some laws about black lung, and they got some laws requiring sampling of coal exposures in the mines. And then 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, there was an expose about how the miners were having to do this exposure monitoring of miners on a regular basis. And then it turned out that they were punching holes in the filters, so they weren't collecting a full sample. And there was a big scandal about that, but that went on for like decades without MSHA, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, catching them at it.
Yeah, I did an episode of the podcast with this guy, Tom, who has a podcast out of Kentucky. And we talked specifically about how like the kind of iconography of the miner as like the labor kind of aspect of that, how it's kind of been used by so many different politicians and startups to appeal to people's people as a result of all the work that the unions did over the years, like in part. And, a lot of people had family members who were working in the mines at some point. And now that like most of those have closed, there's not really money in coal in those parts because it's all been mined, but the brand of the miner or something still it's able to unfortunately make money for like these companies from Silicon Valley were going out there and trying to, take advantage of like subsidies and shit in Appalachia and, selling local governments on apps that have all of this, miner mythology around it, miner lore. Anyway.
Watching the morning show right now.
Yeah.
And for one whole episode, they're playing this song, you load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt, which I think is about cotton growing and stuff like that. As they're showing the lives of these incredibly rich and powerful people who work in network TV news, right? And it's just like, and I've seen this happen before, that they use these songs that are about, this really hard, devastating labor, and they use it to they use it as a background for like working in tech or something.
Yuck. Yeah. I'm happier and happier. Like, of course, now people are consuming so much media vis-a-vis like a TikTok and these other huge corporations. But this was like, I think the worst year on record in terms of like firings from corporate media since like beginning of the 2000s. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of in ways good riddance to the corporate media.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that some stories are not being told as a result. But anyway, one of the things that y'all were doing a few years back was actually directly putting people up. There was the caravan it was refugees from Central America.
Yeah, the caravan was people who were asylum seekers from Honduras, who we ended up dealing with were a couple of lesbians from Honduras, but we were also supporting in general there was a whole issue during the Trump administration of the camps, and there was one camp that was designated for queer or trans people, and there were the deaths. Remember, what's her name? Hernandez. I'd have to look up her name. But so, yeah, we've been involved in the agitation around that, obviously.
Consensus, has LAGAI always run by consensus, like as long as you've been involved?
I think LAGAI has always run by some kind of consensus. I mean, when there were more people in the group, I don't think LAGAI ever had more than 20 active people in the group. Not that there might not be a few more people in the meeting, kind of like gay shame is, So we've never had a formal consensus process. Somebody says, well, I don't think we should do it. Then you listen to them about why you don't think they should do it. And then some people will say something that's the equivalent of a stand aside, like, well, it's not my favorite thing to do, but let's go ahead and do it, or, whatever. But you're not going to go ahead in a group that you want to be stable and long term with. You're not going to go ahead and just say, oh, well, I'm going to block this thing. If it's not somebody whose opinion you value enough to listen to it when they block, then there's no point in when they say they've got a strong objection, then there's no formal consensus process that's going to work for fixing that. I mean, ACT UP tried to apply consensus in a large group of 100 people who didn't have enough shared shared respect or shared goals, shared values. And of course, it fell apart for that. So yes, we've always worked on some kind of consensus or another.
Yeah, no, that seems important. Like there's so many, I guess, aspects that like your answer there kind of included and that lead to like a successful consensus or like informal, as you said, consensus process, like a meeting with too many people, having people that are interested in long-term goals that are shared among people. Yeah. Do you recall, were there ever any cases where the process of consensus or informal consensus didn't work, or that people walked away that you can remember?
We had a couple of people who joined the group who just weren't really okay for the group. One was in Quit, where there was an anti-Semite asshole who wanted to join Quit, and we just had to say, you can't be in. Yeah. We don't support Palestine from that basis, and we don't need you in the group. So we've had a couple of situations like that, where people kind of show up and
no cops, no yummies, yeah.
But so that's happened a couple of times in LAGAI. I'm not sure that the right process was followed for it. They were both a long time ago, and created some bitterness. And
but at the same time, has LAGAI always been open?
Yeah, it's always been open. I mean, right now it's more Quit that's open than LAGAI is open, just because what LAGAI mostly does at this point is the newsletter and, if necessary, help organize an action. But it's not. Quit is more the place that people are going to see to join us, because we're Quit is in the streets a lot more.
Yeah. And I know that you all have actually, in the case of like I'm thinking of like Lisa Strawn from San Quentin, like you all have actually met some of the people that you met, I think, through UltraViolet.
Yeah. Now she's gotten out, and we saw her. They made a play out of some of her poetry or something. And
oh, cool.
And went and we met up with her and saw it. It was those people who do the flying stuff. Yeah. I forget what they call it.
Yeah. With the ribbons and stuff. Yeah.
But anyway, they're using trapezes and flying or whatever.
Okay.
It was a women's collective or art group or whatever who did it. So we saw her there, So yeah, occasionally. And there are many people who get our newsletter in prison who tell us they're getting out, and they'll come and say hi sometime, but they don't, because they're getting out of prison and they're glad to be going back to whatever life they've got.
Do you have recurring inside contributors?
Oh, yes. So we have maybe a dozen people who will send us stuff on at least a couple of times a year. We have one person who sends us stuff constantly, who draws and stuff like that. And a lot of his stuff ends up in the newsletter. And then there are a lot of people who we hear from once and never again, but they've obviously put a lot of thought into what they write up for our newsletter and some of the stuff. And then we hear from people who are trying to sue the prisons and stuff, and we just don't have the resources to help with that. I mean, there's a lot of injustice in this world, and we've tried to, if we can, we'll make a referral or find somebody. We don't have any more. We don't really have that many more resources than the people inside do. We can't get the ACLU to listen to us and help us. We can't. That's how it goes.
Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco, which is produced by Toshio Moronic and edited by Tofu Estolas. If you have it, please throw us a few dollars through patreon.com/sadfrancisco, which will help us pay for podcast hosting, editing, and transcriptions for the show. See you next time in Sad Francisco.